Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to our webinar on finance this morning. My name is Graham Whitehurst. I'm the chair of the Manufacturing Task Force for Mid and East Antrim Borough Council. We've been running a series of support events throughout the crisis to try and help our local companies both steer through the crisis and, importantly at the moment, to try and help our companies to steer their way out of it on the recovery path. So this morning, I'm very pleased to say we've got a couple of guests with us. So we have an expert on finance to help us through some of the difficult questions, which is Tony Harron. Tony's got over 25 years experience in helping local businesses. So it's great to have Tony with us, so thank you, Tony. And we also have a company with us today who is a local manufacturer, a family-owned business, been well established for a number of years, and Paddy Quinn from Quinn-Hurst and Limousine. Paddy's going to answer a few of my questions, which I'll put to him later, just to talk about a real practical example of how a company has been trying to deal with many, many challenges and problems throughout this crisis. So, if you next slide, please, Danielle. So, on the agenda for today, the next hour and a quarter or so, we will be covering the recent survey that we've carried out from the task force, where we've surveyed a large number of local companies, and I thought it'd be interesting just to give you guys a quick update on what we found doing that. And that will lead very nicely into the section, which is the main reason why we're here today, with our business finance mentor, Tony. And then after Tony, we'll have a chat with Paddy, just about his issues he's had to face. And then there's a good section at the end where there'll be a few slides which actually try to list all of the current available financial support for businesses, all in one place, all in one presentation. So I hope you'll find that very interesting, because it also gives you the links to where you need to go to get that support. Okay. As with most of our webinars, they're all recorded, and if we don't get any, if we can't answer your questions, this morning, then we'll get back to you within 5 working days. Okay, so straightforward into the presentation. I think everybody's had some enormous financial challenges actually with business over this last 3 or 4 months. We're facing unprecedented times with the Covid-19 challenge. But I also say it does give businesses an opportunity to really examine how they are working and what their arrangements are and their processes, and is there anything they can do to help to be more efficient and to reduce cost. I think planning is a key. To get to know, is your business on track? How are you planning? How are you managing your cash flow? Are you budgeting? Have you been looking at your budget and reprofiling? Have you been looking at where your cash is and where your cash is tied up, and is there anything you can do to improve that? Work in progress, for example. And how are you looking for efficiencies and savings? So those subjects there of planning will all be touched on this morning by our experts. And again, if you have any questions, please ask the questions as we go through the webinar. Okay, thanks, Daniel. So this morning you'll hear from first-hand and experienced business mentor, Tony. Obviously, Tony's been helping many companies over the last number of years. You'll also hear from Paddy, as I've said. Paddy will be able to give us a good insight into what it's like to live through the difficulty when you're trying to run a business. I'm going to start with just giving you an update on the Manufacturing Task Force that was set up by Mid and East Antrim a couple of years ago now, and it's really been trying to help local businesses to recruit, take on new people, and really rebuild confidence after a number of significant hits to the economy that we had locally here with Michelin and Gallagher's and Pattons, and initially with Whitehurst, which is very nicely coming back. Okay, thank you. What you can see is that we did a survey and we had some excellent responses. We actually had over 80 responses from our survey, and you can see that the type of companies we were looking at were all mainly SMEs. You can see there certainly the different colours, 33 companies less than 9, 32 between 10 and 50. So a large group of employees in the area, and in the different sectors you can see manufacturing, construction across the board. Okay, Danielle. The big findings, I suppose, which is not a shock, 75% said that they'd had a significant negative impact by the coronavirus. 40% said that they'd significantly reduced their income actually surprised me. I thought it'd be greater than that, but this was carried out kind of in the middle of the survey, in the middle of the lockdown, so it could be that it's got worse since. And even at that early stage, as it's sort of halfway through the lockdown, companies were already looking at flexible working patterns and how to maybe work differently with their staff. People were looking at measures such as what they could do to look for PPE, was one of the main ones there, provisional additional hygiene. And even in the early days when we did this, people were already looking to target new customers, and that's become more and more important as we're coming out of the virus. Okay, Danielle, thank you. So the summary would be the top 5 areas that we came out from the survey where companies were requiring support, and it's probably not a surprise to most of you listening in: funding and finance, hence why we're talking today. Sales and new business. Obviously, how can we recover our sales and our business activity after the virus? And as part of doing that, some help on the marketing and e-commerce to drive those sales forward. The fourth big one was health and safety. You can imagine there's been an enormous amount of questions on what do I need to do to restart my business? How do I protect my employees? How do I protect my customers, etc.? And then the last one, digitization, really covers a lot of IT and a lot of just making business easier. People are looking to make business easier, whether it's automation on a manufacturing process or whether it's using the state-of-the-art ERP, MRP systems just to make doing business a lot easier. So those are the 5 main areas that companies were looking for help. And Danielle, please. So what we can see is that every company who actually responded to the survey has now been individually contacted by a member of our local council, and they're in active dialogue with those companies. So I'm currently aware that we have about 50 companies now who we've created this one-on-one link. So I'm really pleased to say that we are actively engaging with our local companies, and those companies are receiving help from the council to help them through this crisis. I think, as you see there, the council is also using this to understand the business needs in relation to potential redundancies to the furlough ending scheme. We're trying to make sure that we flag up early in the process. We still have 3 months to go. Any companies who are concerned about future redundancies to talk to us so that we can do everything we can to try and help reduce any of those events. Okay, so that's a quick summary. You can see we've come up with the 3 key areas we focus on right now, which is the financial support to restart after coronavirus. So webinars like today and other financial support that we're working on. The second is the practical help. We've been doing some webinars with some experts on health and safety and how to actually physically help our companies with provision of PPE, or how to reorganize your site to be COVID-19 secure. And importantly, we've got on the Buy Supply NI portal, which is a portal being set up so that if you want to buy something or if you want to sell something, you should be registered on that particular website. And the idea is to try and really boost the local supply and local purchase for Northern Ireland. And then we've also added a specific section just for PPE and COVID-19 measures. So if you're looking for anything at all to do with COVID-19, go on there and hopefully that will lead you to a solution locally. Okay. And the third one there about finding new customers, again, key issue is how can businesses actually come back to where they were before the crisis, or hopefully even better. And so we need to be helping our customers and local companies to find new business. Okay, thank you, Danielle. And what we will be doing over this next sort of 12 months is we've asked our companies a series of other questions where we said, for these business skills, do you feel you need some support? And they all said yes. So you can see there things like health and safety, but also lean and continuous improvement, things like planning and capacity planning, purchasing, quality assurance, learning and development. They're all typical subjects that a company needs to try and improve. So over this next 12 months, we'll be providing some masterclasses and probably some breakfasts, hopefully one day when we could all get together again, to be able to show our local companies how we can help them and provide ongoing support. So that's a quick insight into what the task force is all about and what we've been working on. So please, anybody out there who wants to engage with us, please do so. We're looking for more and more members and more people to join us. And I honestly believe that we'll be able to help you if you come looking for support. Okay, thank you, Danielle. I'm going to now move on to the main part of the presentation this morning, where we're looking to say how can we help to recover from this post-COVID-19 with specific angle looking at the financial aspects. So I'll kindly hand over to Tony, please.
Great. Thanks very much, Graham, and thanks very much to Mid and East Antrim Council as well for the invite along today. And some really good stuff there, Graham. I can see that there's a lot of support going on in the Mid and East Antrim area, and very timely. I think we were saying just before the webinar started that my background is in finance, and previously my career, if you like, was in banking, and I worked in banking over a long time, worked in lending in banking and in the front line. And I certainly haven't seen anything like what's going on at the moment, and it's certainly unprecedented times. So it is times like this that businesses who often are very isolated can look around for support, and because they do need support at the minute, certainly in finance, and you've raised another range of topics there as well where businesses need support. So yeah, this morning I'm going to talk about finance, business finances. The agenda this morning has been driven by some feedback, I believe, by some of the participants and people in the manufacturing sector. So to be honest, I've delivered a few webinars recently, and I could probably have delivered a webinar on each of these topics alone. So what you're going to get this morning is really just an overview of some of the key areas that businesses should be looking at as we emerge from the lockdown, the closure period of COVID-19 and move out of it. In earlier webinars, I know I was doing a lot of talk about funding, and there were even pre the bounce back loans, and as the government supports were coming out, businesses have moved on a little bit from that, although I think funding is still an issue out there. So really what I'm going to be talking about this morning are the topics that have been raised with me in terms of what people want to have answers to. I'm aware that in the people listening in this morning from different businesses, there's going to be a whole range of sectors. I believe there's quite a few from manufacturing, but I'm sure there's businesses from other sectors as well. So I'm hoping this morning you're going to pick up certain key issues that are relevant to your business. Some may not be, and some may be more relevant to you than others, but it's a matter of you listening to what I'm going to cover and then really taking up the key bits yourself and applying them to your business. So this morning I'm going to cover the key areas there, which are, the first one is budgeting in an uncertain environment. That's an interesting topic. It's one of the areas I've been challenged on most by the businesses I've been speaking to over the last 3 months. In other words, how can you actually budget in an environment where there's no sales and where your costs are uncertain and increasing, funding is uncertain? And I would argue, and I'll show it in a few slides' time, why it's even more important to be budgeting at a time like this. Managing cash flow, which is a topic that really is always there, is probably more to the fore now with the COVID-19 situation, because cash flow has been so important. So I'm going to cover that by looking at just different ways in which you can look at your cash flow, not simply through looking at just your income and maybe some of your costs, but taking a bigger and broader view of that. And an issue as well has come up, and one of the topics that I was asked to cover today, which is collecting money owed. It's something that I had to deal with a number of one-to-one calls I made for other councils early on in this process, and people had a reluctance to ask for money owed, believe it or not, because they thought their customers were in the same position as them, and they were a bit concerned about having to ask them for it. And we had a good debate about that, and I certainly moved them on from that mindset. We're also going to have a look at R&D tax credits. It's a very specialist area. It relates mainly to manufacturing and IT companies. So if you're not from that sector today, that business may not be as relevant, but certainly it's important, and it is something to look at. And then finally, I'll end up with what I call the 5 pillars of good business finance. Really, it's a way for any business to benchmark your business against what I think are best practice in managing your business finances. So we'll have a look at that. The Q&A at the end, I'm not sure if that's going to happen after mine, probably isn't, maybe towards the end of the webinar. So we'll crack on then with the first slide. Okay, this is a little diagrammatic explanation of the working capital cycle for a manufacturing business. I put it up first simply to put in context today, because I'm aware there's quite a few manufacturing companies on, and I know that there's a particular problem for manufacturing companies because you have a longer working capital cycle. So what by that I mean, it takes you longer, obviously, from when you begin to buy in your materials and start making your goods to when you actually get paid. If you're a non-manufacturing business, you will have a shorter working capital cycle than that. So you won't be involved. If you're, for instance, buying in finished stock and selling that, you'll not have the raw materials and the work in progress elements to work out. You'll just take stock, sell it, invoice it, get your money in, and then buy more stock. It's that type of process. And if you're in just a service business, you won't even have stock to buy in. You will simply just sell your service and get paid for it, either upfront or in part payment or through some discounting scheme or part payment scheme. So the reason I'm putting this up here is that this is a time-bound issue, particularly time-bound for manufacturing companies. And each element of this here requires a good hard look, particularly at times like this when things have slowed. So each of these elements in the working capital cycle needs to be managed if you're going to try and manage your cash, manage your sales, manage your profit, and manage your processes. So really it's important to look at every element of those. So putting that up to contextualize what you're about to see. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about the first item on the agenda, which is the budgeting in an uncertain environment. Now, this is the one I said earlier, that a lot of businesses say, how can you possibly budget when you don't know what's around the corner, when you don't know when you're going to open, when you don't know will your customers come back, when you don't know even if all your staff will return and when they'll return. And I argue that really this is the best time to do it. At the very beginning, when there were no open dates, there were no dates for return to normality or new normal, as they call it. When I said, well, look, you can still plan for when you might open, even if you don't know the date. So it's really important that what you do is you begin to think about what your business will look like as you reopen, both in terms of the income side and the cost side. So in terms of trying to budget in an uncertain environment, I think it's important that you do take a good hard look at it. And I've broken it down into these three stages. So stage one is really preparing your budget. So it's the process you go through to producing a budget that you will put either into a budgeting system or into a spreadsheet or some sort of written document. A lot of businesses still that I meet have ideas about budgets and ideas about what they might do in the course of a year, but they're not documented. So they don't put them in the numbers and figures. I'm guessing a lot of businesses here or our manufacturing companies probably have a very formalized budgeting system. And if you do, then that's good. Some of this here will be relevant. Some maybe I'm going to ask, I'll probably be trying to challenge you in terms of the process that you use. So whatever system you use, it's important to have a system to prepare your budget. Secondly, once you prepare them, it's not a matter of having the budgets and just having them in the system and knowing that they're out there, but actually tracking them, managing them, looking at the variances in them and taking actions on them. And then finally, adjusting or reforecasting those. So I'm going to look at those in more detail just on the next slide, which is the preparation element of budgets. So what I'm saying that in terms of budgeting, when I was in banking, a lot of businesses brought me in budgets and forecasts and financial planning documents that said, here's what we want to do next year. And quite often what I was presented with was just like a spreadsheet on an A4 page with 12 months and a figure of income at the top and a whole series of costs at the bottom, down underneath that, and then at the bottom a cash flow position. And they were looking funding for whatever the peak was along that bottom. And in banking, that was never enough for me because I needed to understand what was behind the budgets. So how were they prepared, how were they constructed, and particularly how valid they were and what assumptions were used to produce them. So what I'm saying is that if you're producing budgets, and not necessarily for banking purposes or funding purposes, but for your own internal purposes, it's really important to get right down to the basics of what is in your business. So the services you produce, the prices you charge, the markets that you're in, the costs that you incur, both in terms of if you're manufacturing, in terms of the raw materials, the suppliers, and the production time costs and staff costs, etc. And you build on all your overheads, and you build those up from the bottom, and you look at them in terms of your business, and you produce a budget. Probably at the minute I've been advising businesses here in coming out of lockdown to think about maybe a 6 to 12 month period for budgeting. In normal circumstances, I would advise 12 to 18 to 24 months. If you're looking at external funding, it could be longer than that, but by and large, internal budgets, 6 to 12 months would be normal. And if needs be, if you've got a business that's really looking at things on a very tight basis, then I'd be looking and suggesting that you do a weekly budget. So maybe 13 weeks, 20 weeks, something like that, if it's that sort of tight and controlled. But either way, some sort of term that you think is appropriate for yourself. So really, it's not about breaking down your products that you sell, looking at the prices that you charge for those, and challenging yourself on the prices you charge, whether you can come out of this process and charge more, charge the same, or charge less, but do challenge yourself on that. And some people say, well, where do you start? I've never done budgets before. I'm not sure what I should do. And I said, well, take last year's 12 months, split those out, what you actually did last year, what your costs were actually last year, and use that as a base and say, well, if I did that last year, what will I do this year? Clearly, this year is different because COVID-19 has come in. But if you're budgeting, you're looking forward, you're not looking back. So as you look forward now, your business begins to reemerge, or maybe it has been working even through this process. But you need to be thinking about the next 6 to 12 months, not looking back, except to use that as some sort of base to start with. Writing down the key assumptions, that was a thing that was very often missing for me in banking, and it's still missing when I talk to small businesses now about their budgeting process. When I ask them to produce budgets, they can come off with figures about 10,000 a month or 15,000 a month, or I did 100,000 last year, or 120 this year. But when I ask them about the assumptions behind that, in terms of the sales assumptions, the market assumptions, the product assumptions, the costs, the overheads, the timeframes, the timelines, they're always a little bit vague. And I think it's important, if you prepare a budget, prepare the assumptions and write those down. Because writing them down will make sure that it will validate how you've arrived at those figures. And then finally, at the bottom of that last bullet point, it's something, again, that maybe larger businesses should think about doing. Because a lot of people say, how can you predict what you're going to do in the next 6 to 12 months? Because it could be higher and it could be lower. And I suggest, well, if you're worried about that, produce what you think are the best possible set of budgets for you. You think the most realistic, based on all the things you know, all the assumptions you make, you produce one set of figures. If you like, you can then sensitize those. So what you can do is you can say, well, that would be in that's what I expect to happen. But if things weren't really that good, sales might be down by 20% or 25%, or some products mightn't sell as well. And you can bring your income down a little bit to reflect what might happen if things weren't as good as you expect. And your costs might be higher than you expect. You could increase your costs. So you could produce a second set of budgets really saying, well, that's what I think will happen, and here's what I think might happen if things weren't as good as I thought. And equally, if things were better than you thought, you can produce a best case scenario budget. And that's also useful, because if things increase and sales are better than you expect and costs are lower, that's a good thing. Now, it is a good thing as well, especially in manufacturing, to put that into a written down spreadsheet or budgeting system, because increased sales are good. But as we looked at the first slide in terms of the manufacturing cycle, there's a time period for that. So increasing your sales is good, but increasing your sales means more raw materials, perhaps more work in progress, production processes, warehousing, logistics, more staff, etc. So you've got to think of the financing side of that. So in terms of preparing your budgets, it's important that you look at it as a project. But what you produce at the end of it is a set of figures, but backed up with a set of assumptions, and that gets you started. So next slide. The important element of managing budgets, a lot of people do produce them and they spend a lot of time producing them, and they spend less time managing them. In other words, they don't have a system for reviewing their budgets on a regular basis. So, and the way you review your budgets is typically you review your actual outcome with your budget outcome. So you look at your sales and your costs, and you compare what you think happened against what I think would happen against what actually happened. And you understand why that happened. So if your sales were 10% up or 10% down, you understand why. And you try to think about how that affected your business and what you need to do going forward to make sure that you either improve on the positive elements or get rid of or mitigate the negative elements of that. So it's about managing them ongoing and using variances to do that. And getting some challenge. And I would, certainly with sole traders and maybe small businesses who work on their own, I would suggest that they try to find some external support or external challenge, should I say, to their business, as in maybe through the mentoring scheme that the council works, but find some way to get somebody to talk to you about your figures and challenge you in terms of your thinking about those figures and challenge you in terms of what you might need to do to improve on those figures. So next slide. This is important, again, possibly for larger businesses to look at this here, but some businesses say, well, sure, I would write a budget and it's there for 12 months, and after 3 months, I look at it and I go, well, that's probably not working out the way I thought, so really the budgets aren't that good, so I'll set them aside. And I argue, well, no, don't set them aside, actually go through a process of reforecasting them. So if you have a forecast, say it's something simple, £10,000 a month, over 12 months, £30,000 expected income after month 3, and you get to month 3 and you've got £22,000 worth of income. Rather than set aside the budgets, I would argue that you should reforecast the following 9 months and have a look and see, well, what do you need to do to try to get that 22 or that less than 10,000 a month back up again, and reforecast what your year might look like now if you do some more work. So it's not about setting the budgets aside, it's more about taking the budgets and analysing them and seeing how that has changed your thinking and what you need to do to make a difference to your business that will try to achieve the original budget, rather than set it aside because reality has kicked in and it isn't going the way you thought it would. Okay, next slide. Yeah, we're moving on to the managing cash flow, which is the second topic element that I was asked to cover. Really crucial at times like this, obviously. And I'm aware, again, everybody listening to this might be in a slightly different position in terms of how they manage their cash flow. But managing cash flow is a phrase that's bandied around and thrown out there as almost like as a single thing that you do, which is get your money in and pay it out. But I argue, again, that you should look at it in different headings. So there's a way of managing your income part of your cash flow. There's a way of managing your expenditure part of your cash flow. There's a way of managing your assets, which are your factories, your vans, even your computers, anything you use. And secondly, or fourthly, there's the liabilities, managing the liabilities, which are all of the creditors and things like that, and suppliers and how you produce things, etc. So all of those things need to be separately managed. So taking the first one, income. Yeah, this is broken down again into different elements. So there's different elements of income, which is your sales revenue. So looking at your sales side, it's important that you look not just at your total sales, but at your gross profit, particularly in manufacturing. So your gross profit margin should be a figure that you manage and review on a very regular basis. If you only provide a service, you'll not have a gross profit. You will just have a net profit. So it's just about managing that sales revenue side of it and analysing that on a regular basis. Usually, again, your actual against your budgets. And looking at your channels in terms of your sales channels and how you deliver and how you get paid for things as well. A lot of people are moving obviously to some sort of online payment processing and not taking checks as they might have in the past, and making sure that they have sort of a payment system that allows payment to be made quickly and effectively and get it into their bank account. So it's looking at all the aspects of revenue, not just the whole piece around the price you charge and the income, but the whole piece around revenue. Grants, not many of them, obviously, but in the last while there have been a few government grants, small business grant and the self-employed grant, etc. And there's some third sector grants out there as well for those in the community and voluntary sector. But again, if it's something that your business can get, it's a matter of going into the system and making sure that you get whatever grants are possible, and you keep an eye out for them, because they tend to have a short opening and closing date, or a short running date from when they open to when they close. Debt, obviously very important at the moment, and many of you may well have researched and maybe taken out the bounce back loans, which have been a boon to some small businesses who have had a lot of uncertainty, and maybe some who missed out on the grants. So the bounce back loans have been very good for businesses because there's no interest in payments for 12 months, and then a very low 2.5% at the end of the first year for the remaining 5 years. So I know a lot of businesses who have taken those out as a little bit of a cushion. If you have other debt, some businesses are using it to pay it off, but there's an element of making sure that you manage that whole debt side. And I'm actually speaking to a business at the moment who has an historic lot of debt, and they want to restructure it now as they move out of this to try to find a way to get it all repaid and quickly and get it into a proper structure. Equity is the money you put into the business yourself, and the owner puts into the business, and that just needs to be balanced against debt. So in any bank situation or funding situation, the bank will look to have not too much debt in the business. They want the owner to have some stake in the business as well. So looking at your income, it's important just to balance your equity against your debt. So next slide. Expenditure, obviously, this needs to be very closely examined, right down into the individual lines of each cost item. Well, I will argue that you need to look at on the right-hand side there, I've got the controllable costs and uncontrollable costs. So it's a matter of splitting out the costs in your system or in your business that are controllable from those that are uncontrollable. Don't waste too much time on the uncontrollable costs, even if they're large. It's important you look at the controllable costs, because that's typically what you can control, very obviously. And you're better spending your time on those and looking at some higher costs. But every year, once a year, the uncontrollable costs, I think, should be examined in terms of how you spend your money on fixed assets, or how you spend on your large costs like power bills, etc. So you need to look at that at least annually. The first two, the direct costs and the overheads, very important. They need to be managed again, probably through the budget system, making sure that any costs you have to direct, if you're manufacturing, or any subcontract costs, any costs that you pay to external suppliers, it's really important that you manage those as well, very, very tightly, and that you find a way to make sure that nothing or as little as possible comes through the system that you're not expecting. And the budgeting system helps with that. So next slide. Managing assets, again, stock, work in progress, raw materials for manufacturing companies, really important looking at the production processes, because that's all about time and how long it takes to move through your system. Really important that you look at that, because they all tie up cash. Each of those elements separately ties up an element of cash. I've been in a few manufacturing companies in the last 2 to 3 months, well, not physically visiting mind you, but talking to them, and not many of them can easily tell me exactly how much stock, work in progress, and raw materials they have at any point in time. They tell me it's a year-end situation that they get a handle on, but during the year it's important as well. You can have a stock management system that will track that. Debtors, in terms of sales, those who you sell to, really important that you have very strong terms of business. It's really important that you have a very clear handle on terms of the how you get paid, when you get paid, how much you get paid at any point in time, and preferably try to front end as much as that to make sure you get paid as quickly as possible. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, about collecting money from debtors. Bank and cash, if you're in the fortunate position of having a lot of cash and money in the bank, that's good, great comfort, but could it be earning more for you? Could it actually be doing more for you in terms of having an asset or investing it in something that will give you a better return? So it's important to have enough cash, clearly, to run your business and some reserves, but having too much cash, and I have seen it in some businesses, they'd have been better investing in a better asset or a better production process than having the money sitting just purely in cash. The contingent and long letters of guarantee, they're not really important for many businesses, but some businesses do have what I call contingent liabilities that are dependent on something else, like letters of credit for import. That probably won't affect too many businesses here, but for the purposes of putting it onto a slide with liabilities, I did want to add that because some businesses may be facing that. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, collecting money owed. I touched on it in the last slide in terms of debtors, but I'm looking at this in terms of 6 steps. Really at the outset, and people think about collecting money as something you do at the end, and it's really important that you get the money in, and that is absolutely true. But there's also a whole series of steps before that that are really important before you actually get to the point of collecting money. I was speaking to a business the other day, and they have an awful problem at the minute that when they have an invoice that's been sent out, and they're coming up to 45 days when they're expecting to get paid, and they ring the customer is increasingly starting to dispute the invoice, saying they didn't get the stuff or they returned the stuff, and that's causing them severe problems because they are finding that they have to then go and investigate what happened at the start, and they find invariably something happened in their business along the way that caused them to create the incorrect invoice. So I'm saying that all of these elements are all important before you get to the tail end of it, and I'll talk about that in a second. But at the very beginning there is making sure at the very outset, if you're dealing with customers, if you're in the fortunate position that your business is taking in cash as you hand over your service or your product, that's good, because you will follow-up items. But if you have to invoice for what you do and you have to wait for money to come in, just make sure you front end as much of that as possible. So if you have a manufacturing business, if there's any way that you can get some sort of part payment or initial payment, it's important to do that to keep your cash flow going. And if not, even if you provide the service, I know a lot of web developers will look for money up front before they start to develop somebody's website. They'll take a portion and then a portion when the first website's up, and then they'll take an element at the end. So have a think about how you offer your services to businesses at the very beginning, at the very point when you start offering a service to them or a product. Agree the payment terms in writing, the second box there. Consider credit checks on the customers that you're looking at. Consider insurance as well. Consider discounts for early settlement as well. That may be important for some business who want to generate some cash. But be careful about that, because over discounting will affect your margin. So just be sure if you discount that it's not going to materially affect your net profit or gross profit margins. One thing that I find a lot of businesses don't seem to do a lot of, which is the monthly statements. Some businesses don't have you need a good bookkeeping system for this. So if you're working off spreadsheets or paper-based, you'll not be able to do this. But having a regular system where every month you send out an invoice, or every week or whatever you send out your invoices, but at least once a month, you look into your system, look at all your customers, and you send them out a statement to tell them how much they owe you. Something as simple as that just reminds the business customer that you're still there and you haven't been paid. And really, that's the point where you need to make sure that you follow up on that. So some businesses are reluctant to follow up on that because of their customers and they're not sure. And I encourage every business to make sure that you've got a system in place that you send out your invoices as soon as you can send them out, and you look for a payment term that's as short as possible as you can get away with, and that you issue a statement to those businesses who haven't paid you on a monthly basis, and that you follow that up with phone calls or emails to make sure that you do get your money into the bank as soon as possible. And let me assure you, most businesses who have a system like that don't find any major problem with their customers when they're being reminded for payment. You know, customers are expected going to be asked for payment. And to be honest, a lot of customers out there are probably, they maybe need a trigger to ask them for payment. But having a system in your business which looks at your overdue payments, like an age list of debtors, really important that's part of your management reporting cycle. So either way, it's important you do that. The final box there is the last resort. So if you do run into cash flow problems and businesses who owe you money haven't paid you, I've even the last week I've been speaking to a bit of business about that particular problem, and they told me, and I've heard this quite a few times, where they actually did, when they were owed money last year, towards the end of last year, and they went into the business, they phoned the customer up, said, look, I'm coming past, I'm calling in to get the money. And they called in and just waited until the customer paid them. They didn't leave the office until they were actually paid. In that case, they did take a check, reluctantly. But I do know businesses who will, when they're owed money, will call in and stand there and wait to get paid. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that as a last resort. Bearing in mind, if you've got an ongoing customer relationship, that might be difficult, but just don't discount it. So next slide. R&D tax credits, I'll just go through this very quickly. A very specialist area. I'm an accountant by profession, but I don't specialize in these here. And I know accountants who don't specialize in that in terms of running a practice. There are specialist firms out there who do this, and there are specialist firms out there who professionally look at this. And if you're in manufacturing or any business where there's some element of research and development, then it's important that you either at least look at this, and then if you aren't eligible for it, that's fine. If you are eligible for it, then that's fine as well. But make sure you find out if you're eligible, because there are benefits to be received in this in terms of getting some tax credits against the taxation that you're being charged with. So there's two schemes. First one is the small and medium enterprise scheme, which is for those businesses, which I guess is probably most of the audience this morning, fewer than 500 staff and either not more than 100 million turnover or 86 million euro in gross assets. So they're European-led definitions of SMEs that fit into the scheme. There's a larger RDEC scheme, which is Research and Development Expenditure Control scheme. So that basically is it's a different scheme. I'm not going to talk about it today because it's not many, I think, on this webinar that will be eligible for it. So next slide. Yeah, the calculation basically small. There's no minimum amount, by the way. No matter how much money you've spent on R&D, any of it could be eligible for a tax credit. So it's for small, medium enterprise agencies, enterprises, and through the system you can deduct an extra 130% of any qualifying costs. So if you have £100,000 of research and development costs, you can deduct another £130,000 from your added onto your costs, and deduct it from your sales to reduce your profit so you pay less tax. That is a very specialized scheme, lots of little criteria. It's an industry in itself in terms of how to work it out. And you claim the tax credit through your corporation tax return, or if you're loss making, then you can claim it against your losses. So next slide, Danielle, please. Yeah, just the process here. The process is The first step is just to understand if you do any research and development work at all, have a look at that to make sure there's any elements of your business that there might be eligible for that. And then you have to prepare what's called a technical brief, which is usually done by a specialist, which looks at and explains the type of research and development process that you're undertaking and why you believe that would be eligible for the scheme. The third step is the bit where you get into the forensics, you get right into the nitty-gritty of your business in terms of looking at the costs that might be eligible to be included in this, and that's where the specialists come in, because they can include staff costs, direct staff costs, they can look at subcontracted costs, and they can bring all that into a calculation, which is used then to submit to HMRC, and who then review your claim. And through that process, they establish A, if the company is eligible, and B, if the expenditure you've submitted is eligible. So it's on today to highlight to those businesses who maybe haven't done it before. If you've already done it, it's probably just to refresh your mind about what's happening there. And if you are getting advice on that, or just check and make sure you feel that that is the specialist advice that you need to get in this very particular area. There are companies who actually just do research and development tax credit schemes. That's all they do. So it's a very specialist area. So if there's more information needed than that, I'm sure it can be provided after the webinar. So next slide. And my last, you may be glad to hear. This last slide is really for any business out here. It's something I use when I'm doing my mentoring with small businesses. I look at every small business in much the same way at the outset. No matter what they tell me the financial issues they may have, I benchmark their business against what I call 5 pillars. And those 5 pillars are, as you see in front of you, the first one is good bookkeeping. And by that I mean having a proper, usually a cloud-based bookkeeping system that they use to manage their business. So they have all of their records managed. They have it linked to their bank account. They can get reports from it. They can easily produce their information for their company tax returns, their company's house returns, and for managing information internally. So that's the first element that I look at, the first pillar. And why I call them pillars is because every single one of these I think is important. And to have all of them strong, because if any one of them's weak, then that could affect the whole business. So they all interlink, while they'll look a bit separate, they all do interlink. But it's important just to look at each one individually. The second one is have a good accountant, and just make sure that the accountant that you use is good. A lot of people stick with the same accountant they have for many years, and I don't argue against that. I don't think it's right to change your accountant regularly, but just make sure that what you get from your accountant is what you need from your accountant. I am an accountant and I work with small businesses, and I do get surprised from time to time when I'm telling a business something. And I'm going, has your accountant not told you this? Have they not explained this to you? Have they not shown this to you? Have they not shown you how to use your bookkeeping system better than you're using? So it does surprise me a little when things like that don't happen between a business and their accountant. The third pillar, there are quite a lot in this one. This is about your business model, and I have seen a lot of businesses looking at their business model over the last 3 months. Previously, there would have been a lot. Now there maybe 4, 5, 6 times that I've spoken to are looking at how they manage their business. Why? COVID-19. Coming out of COVID-19, the business environment is going to be different for many businesses. So it's really important just to examine how you operate. This covers things like how you price for your products, what products you offer, what markets you're in, what sectors you're in. If you manufacture, the steps and elements of that manufacturing process. If you're how many staff you employ, and I know that's a big issue for businesses now as we come towards the end of the furlough scheme and a new version of that. Businesses are looking how they do it, even down to where staff work from home, remotely, part in, part time, etc. All of that just is part of how you operate, and the financial elements that are really important that you look at on a regular basis, but particularly now in COVID-19. The fourth pillar is the funding element. We talked a little bit about that. I know that the bounce back loans are there. Really important that you've got the right funding structure for your business, and that comes typically out of if you do good budgeting and you look at how you are going to grow your business, and you've got to look and see can that be funded internally from profits and cash, or do you have to seek external funding to help that to happen. So just as important that you look at that element of funding and make sure that, or look at your funding and make sure that whatever funding you have in place today will hold you through the next 2 to 3 years of your business as you plan to grow it or diversify it or even just consolidate it if that's your decision. And finally, the bit that we have touched on today, which is the regular oversight and forward planning. So the forward planning bit is the budgeting we talked about. Not a lot of businesses I've come across, probably not the majority of businesses anyway, do a lot of budgeting and analysing and forward planning. And not a lot as well spend a huge amount of time looking back over their financial information. And I think both of those elements are really key to having a good, strong set of finances. Really important that a business looks back on where it's come from and what it's done, and uses that information to decide what it needs to do in the future to improve sales, improve profit, or improve costs. So all of those 5 pillars, I'll leave that with you. Whatever business you're in, I would argue that those 5 elements can be applied to your business, one way, shape, or form. 1 or 2 of them may be relevant to you. If you've got all of those 5 in place and they're all rock solid, fantastic, perfect business, and I'd love to meet you. So look, that's me finished today. That's the all of the elements that I was asked to speak about today, and I rounded it up there with that overview on finance generally, and how you maybe can do a little bit of self-assessment of your business against each of those pillars to see how you're meeting up against that. So thank you for your time, and I'm going to hand back to Graham, I think, who's going to introduce the next.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I think it's great to have someone with us with your expertise. I think you can see, folks, through a very methodical and clear presentation, a kind of step-by-step approach to good financial housekeeping. Some of the points I was just jotting down here as I was going through the presentation with Tony, just from my own experience of running companies for a number of years. You know, this idea of budgeting, it can feel like it's a heavy thing to do, and have I got time to budget when I'm so busy? But I do find it very useful, particularly this idea of the regular review of what we actually did versus what we thought we would do. And that regular review can be used in the form of a monthly meeting, a balanced scorecard approach, looking at variances to say, we either spent more than we thought we should have done, why was that, what action can we take, or maybe we didn't sell quite as much as we wanted to, etc., etc. I think that's a really great process for people to sort of get into. And what it does, it engages everybody in your management team in that process, and obviously tries to have better accountability of people's performance within the team. Another one I was very interested to look at was, and it's something I've done in the past, is the idea of looking for your work in progress. Quite often as a manager, we get stuck in the office, and it's great sometimes to walk out on the shop floor, open your eyes, and actually imagine all of those parts and all of that stock is actually pound notes, or sorry, they're old, maybe it's more £20 notes today. But it's great to look at that and say, could I actually turn that into cash? Could some of those products that maybe I've not used for a while, could I use them somewhere else? Could I, for example, in my area where I might have some non-conformities, could I sell them as seconds? Could I do a marketing campaign? You know, there's so many things that it can link to you're looking for. On the expenditure, I was pleased to see Terry talked about that as well. Again, in your company, do know exactly who spends your money, how they spend it, when they spend it, and have you put in measures and controls to make sure that people only spend the money that they're entitled to. All these things are best practice, and all these things are really, I suppose, common sense, or very useful when they're all written down on a spreadsheet or a presentation, as Tony's done for us there this morning. So that presentation will be available to everybody who's listening in. So again, Tony, thank you very, very much. And as we finish off today, I'll go back through the questions and answers, and I'm sure there'll be some for Tony. Okay, what I'm going to do now is just hand over a few questions here to Paddy. First thing I'd like to do is there's a slide to explain a little bit more about Paddy's business. So, Paddy, perhaps if yourself, you can just talk through that slide for me, if that's okay.
Basically, it's a family-owned business. We started in 1986, building hearses and limousines for the funeral industry. So it's quite a niche market that we get into, and we're one of only 2 on the island of Ireland that actually do this. We sell at the minute around 30 to 35 a year, and that includes hearses, limousines, and what we call first call ambulances for lifting remains from hospitals. And we have about 24 staff, and with 4 or 5 doing admin stroke management. I say about 4 or 5 because I get involved in production now and again. And sort of 18 main production staff. We sell throughout the UK and Ireland and sometimes further afield. And obviously a lot of that's been pretty severely impacted by the pandemic recently.
Oh, thanks, Paddy. I was talking to Paddy before the webinar today, folks, and just to say to you that, you know, quite often people think they're quite a small family business. I was saying to Paddy, the size of business with 24 employees in this area is actually in the top 20% of businesses. We have 80% of our businesses have less than 10 employees. So it's good sometimes to even realise that how Paddy and the family have grown the business has turned them into one of the most successful in the area. Okay. Paddy, just a few questions perhaps, just obviously the virus hit us in March. What level of reduction in your activity sales have you seen over the last 2 or 3 months?
Well, we seen for the first time in 8 years that we didn't have a single sale in a whole month. Now that was partially due to the fact that we closed for 3 weeks, but it was quite a stark impact immediately, and that more or less came from just the fact that everybody closed at the same time. Our suppliers closed, well, a lot of our customers didn't close obviously, but what they did do was sort of scale back for a few weeks while they were quite busy, unfortunately. But yeah, it was quite a cliff edge basically, and towards the end of March, beginning of April.
And how did you deal with that in terms of the staff? Obviously, I think you said you closed down there for 3 weeks. So did you put all your staff onto furlough?
Yeah, we put all staff on furlough initially, and then between week 3 and 4, we did like a risk assessment to make sure that we could make the changes necessary to bring people back in safely with social distancing and whatnot. So between week 3 and 4, we brought in like a skeleton staff to set up the factory the way we needed to do to utilize space better and move things around, whatever. And we ended up coming back with about 2/3 on week 4, because there's guys shielding or just taking time to protect their families or needed childcare or whatever. And we've been running the 2/3 capacity for about 12 weeks, and then slowly the guys are starting to drip feedback in again into production. But I was quite happy to see a lot of the things that was in Tony's slides, because a lot of things he's talking about we tried to implement. We looked at our work in progress and how we could reduce that, and it's actually had a positive effect on our lead time as well. We looked at what stock we had, and we were quite lucky in a way, because we had tried to do something to prepare for a no-deal Brexit, which we thought might affect the business in the similar way that the pandemic has, and that we would struggle to get supplies in with disruption to the supply chain, and also that we would struggle to export possibly due to some changes. We found those two things hit us where there were the main disruptions, mainly because the government test centres closed and we get the vehicle type approved. So we had built a small stockpile of supplies for an emergency situation, which we were able to use, which meant we didn't have to pay for it now. And we'd also sort of contingency plans in place for not being able to bring money in at the other end, which meant when we immediately came back into production, we had a bit of a buffer there for 6 to 8 weeks that thankfully it didn't affect us the way it could have.
So in terms of your management of cash flow, from what I'm hearing you say, you obviously had the furlough scheme to support your costs with your staff, and then you managed to use up some of your stock so you didn't have to purchase new supplies from your suppliers.
Yeah, we're lucky as well that the vehicles, as they go through the production process, get paid in installments. So they get paid in a 25% installment. So even though they weren't able to get tested at the end, they were still 75% paid, which means that we were able to push another vehicle forward into the next stage coming behind it. If we needed an influx of cash that week or that day, it gave us that wee bit of flexibility that we were able to manage what was coming through the process. And also we took advantage of the bounce back loan scheme, which as a really good insurance policy. If you don't need to use it, you can hand it back after 12 months, basically. And if you do need to use it, it's a very cheap loan.
Yeah. No, I think it sounds very sensible. I mean, I'm really pleased when you say you've got the idea of part payments of your product. It's something many companies forget about. But if you're making a product very quickly, there's no need to do that kind of thing. But when you're in a project mode where a product can take you several weeks or several months to complete, it's a perfectly normal practice to expect a customer to part payment. And I do that with a lot of local companies as well. So, and some people seem to forget that. They think they've got to spend all of their cash to 2 months to make a product and let it sit on the shelf, you know?
Yeah, to be honest, it works for our clients as well, because when they get the letter in to say that their vehicle is at that stage with photos, it means that it's holding us to account as well. Yeah. And they're quite happy with it.
Just in terms of, you're obviously now thinking of coming out of the virus, and you say you guys, where are you right now? Are you back up to full speed? Have you still got people on furlough?
We've got a couple of people on furlough. We've a couple of guys that are shielded and are high risk, yeah. And we don't want to take any chances. Obviously, like the safety of your staff is really important. What we have done, we were almost able to get a similar production out of the 2/3 of staff that we were because of the change had been made. What we've done with the additional staff is they've come back and was actually diversified into another product. We looked at what the industry needed, because a lot of people started making PPE or ventilators or hand sanitizers, but the funeral industry needed products to help them as well. And we went to develop two, and we've got one into full production that's been going really well. It's like a taxi style partition for funeral limousines, and it's been going very, very well. And it means that we've got another revenue stream that is able to cover any the drops in sales as well from our main vehicles.
It's one of the key things that we are trying to advise our companies is to think out of the box, be innovative, and just because you've always supplied a product or service in a certain way before the virus doesn't mean that you have to do that after the virus. And I'm really pleased to see some of the ideas coming out there, Paddy, because obviously your industry was hit badly, but some of your ideas, as you say, trying to put in place some measures that are linked to the virus, whether it's the idea of the separation with inside the limousines, I don't know, but our local taxis, do they need separations? Could you provide some for them,
Believe it or not, we have had inquiries from taxi drivers as well.
You have a customer base, which obviously is a certain customer base, is think outside the box for your customers. You've created a brand new product, in effect. Can that product be used for somebody else? And these are all ideas, I think, that are really, we really want our companies to start doing. And what's really useful is if, as a business owner, you have those ideas yourself, you ask your staff. It's a great thing to do, is to ask your staff. But also, and as Tony said, is why don't you try and bring in a couple of experts just to throw some ideas on the table? We're going to see in a moment some of the financial support and packages which are available to companies. And you can get some advice, in most cases, for free, and very, very good advice, which obviously then just the couple of hours it takes you is worthwhile.
Oh, absolutely. Like we would have been lost without some of the mentoring that we've got from the East Antrim Council, and I really mean that. Pardon me, because we also had to think about sales post-COVID, because we didn't want to get stuck in the trap of coming back after lockdown and being really busy with the orders that we hadn't finished, and then after that having nothing. So we put a bit of our investment into marketing and sales, and we've been working through the mentoring program for that as well, and it's been super. We've started clawing back and getting new customers and getting new sales from existing customers, and it's been really crucial. So that advice is fantastic, and it's out there, and a lot of it's free.
And if there's, just to finish off, that's Paddy, if there's one bit of advice that you'll try and give and the other local companies who are also trying to find their way out of this sort of virus or crisis, what would be your kind of snippets of support for them?
I think everybody's in the same boat, really. And if you talk to people within your company and outside of it, there'll be a lot of people that will be able to empathise and give advice. And if you bounce ideas off everybody, you're far more likely to be able to find a way to move forward. Because that's what we did between our staff and between the people at the council and even our friends, suppliers and customers. And everybody sort of tried to help everybody else out, because we're all in it together at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Okay, well, look, Dave, thank you very much for today. I think it's great to have a person who's running through this virus like everybody else and working their way through it and still coming through it strongly and hopefully being innovative. I love your idea of trying to look for what your customers' new requirements are now. And again, trying to diversify your products and services for every business, I think, is the way forward. So it's great to hear. Thank you very much for that, Paddy.
Thank you.
Danielle, we'll go through the next few slides and then we'll do a few questions at the end, I think. So if you take the next couple of slides. So those guys still listening in, if you look at these slides here, they are a list of the current financial support for business schemes. And we can see the name of the scheme, a little bit of detail as to what the scheme's about, and just a couple of words about the key eligibility of the schemes. And I don't intend to go through each one of these. You're very pleased to hear about today. But what I want you to do is be aware that they do exist. There are quite a lot of schemes, and to work out which scheme might be the most suitable for your business is a challenge, because you're thinking, my goodness, there's lots of schemes there. What would help me the most? And I think for that, you should be contacting the council. You'll see at the end of this presentation, there are contact numbers for the council. Have a chat with someone, and they can hopefully lead you down the right path to the level of support that you're looking for. If you go on, Danielle, please, I think there's a couple of slides. I'll just mention the business mentoring scheme. If you keep going, the next one, please. And the next one. And the next one. Yes, keep going. Yes, right at the bottom, back one, please, sorry. So if you see at the bottom there, folks, there's one says Business Escalator Mentoring Program. So this is to get specific help from an expert, business mentor for your company in a wide variety of areas, not just finance, but there is finance available, sales, marketing, business development, digitization. So we talked about that survey that we carried out, and nearly every company said to us, we need help with finance, we need help with sales, we need help with marketing, okay? And the digital world as well. So there is help available. If you contact your local council, and as long as you're eligible, and any company with under 50 employees normally is, you'll be able to get help from a mentor who can come in, analyse your needs, analyse your problems, and hopefully give you bottom line support. And I don't know, I've been in business a long time. Sometimes it just helps to talk to somebody. When you're going through something like this and you're the owner of a business or the managing director of a business, you can feel isolated, you can feel lost at times. You have all the responsibility on your own back. So it's good if you can talk to someone who has no other axe to grind other than there to help you. So I think it's very useful to use these kind of opportunities. And I know our local council is doing this very, very well at the moment. So I think you should take the opportunity, folks. Okay, so you see there's at least 4 or 5 pages of business support that's available. And I'd ask you all to look through those and try and identify which of those might be the most suitable for your business. Okay. A couple of questions I think have come in over the last hour or so. There's a question there, probably Tony, maybe more for yourself. It's asking about a company saying, I have people who are currently on furlough, and how would I factor in the reductions in the furlough scheme payments into my budget?
Yeah, those changes, have just come out. I mean, it will depend on the business and depend on the employees. So, I mean, obviously they're now allowing staff to come back on a part-time basis, and you can claim for the time, if you like, that they're still furloughed for. So if somebody's furloughed for 60% of the time, then you can claim 60% of the grant. There's probably no way around it other than to sit down and look at the staff, break down the staff into terms of whether they're coming back full-time or part-time, and just do a calculation. in terms of the wage you'll be paying them, and then the amount of grant that you're due to get and the timing of that, and then factoring both of those into any budget. So the grant obviously coming into the income line at the top, and any costs and the wages going into the bottom line. But it would be difficult for any business to do a broad brush and take in a percentage of something. You could do it if you've got an awful lot of staff, but I would suggest the best way to do it would be to look at each individual staff and look at what the cost to you is in terms of their wage and the amount of grant that you can claim through the scheme, the furlough scheme, and look at the timings of those, and then just factor those in individually. And if you have maybe up to 10 employees, you can look at each one individually. Maybe if you have 20, 25, 30 plus employees, you might be able to do it on a group basis. But it is very important to do that, because the furlough scheme is, the amount of money being paid out is reducing, and and the time, and I think the scheme itself in total ends at the end of October. So if you're budgeting now, you should be budgeting for the period obviously up to the end of October, but beyond that, when you're going to be carrying the full cost.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. I had a question from someone who was asking me about that I've currently got people furloughed, and I'm worried that when the furlough stops, I might have to make redundancies. What do I need to do? And for me, we have a really good opportunity in the next 3 months, July, August, September, towards October as well, 3.5 months, where we can start to plan and prepare for any eventuality of such things as redundancy. And what I would ask people to do out there is that if you are scared, worried, concerned about having to make people redundant, is contact the council, talk to us, explain to us what your problems are, because there's maybe things that we can do. For example, could we be doing some upskilling of your workforce or cross-training of your workforce during the next 3 months that would allow you to maybe reduce your costs elsewhere in the business? So I'll give you an example. If you're currently subcontracting work, could you bring that in-house by upskilling your workforce? And could that upskilling be provided for you by the council or by the NRC maybe, or someone like that? So I think there's lots of ideas that could come out of a really good conversation with an expert, so that you don't automatically assume that you just can do nothing, and when furlough ends, you're going to have to make those redundancies. Because I know business people do not want to make redundancies. It's a horrible thing to do. I've had to do it myself in the past, and it's that knot in your stomach that you carry around with you. They are your staff, you treat them as your family, and you want to look after them. So anything that you can do in the next 3 months to help improve the situation, whether it's in sales and marketing and get yourself a better website, get yourself into new customers, all of that can be done. So please, I'd ask you to engage with the council, and we'll see what we can do. Okay. I see just another question coming in there. I was unable to get support from the furlough scheme and the hardship fund due to my company processing pay on the annual PAYE scheme. Are you aware of any moves to change the eligibility criteria in any of the schemes to accommodate annual PAYE scheme users? I don't know whether Tony, you've heard of that one?
Yeah, I mean, I get a sense from all of the sources and public sources and just words that I hear that there's not a huge amount that's going to change from any of the schemes that are out there at the moment. I know there's been quite a debate about the sole directors who missed out by not being able to furlough themselves, etc. And that was quite a lot of pressure, if you like, put on the powers that be, the Treasury particularly, a month or two back, but that hasn't changed. And at the minute, I haven't heard of any noise about anything that's going to change these schemes, because the government feel that they've covered as many large gaps, if you like. I'll look into it after the call. It's come from Adrian. I'll just see if there's any noise around that, Adrian, but I'm not aware of any other changes to the schemes at the moment. The government, I think, believes that by the package of solutions they have out there through the bounce back loan schemes, which they've guaranteed, and the employee schemes, the grants, etc., that they've done as much as they can do. So I'll look into it anyway to see if there's any change, and we'll communicate that afterwards, but I'm not aware of any planned changes at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate there'll be other people like Adrian out there who maybe feel like they've fallen through the gap, the holes, and they're one of the companies who hasn't received support. I think, you know, even if you can't get the direct financial support that other people have been fortunate enough to get, I do think it'd be worthwhile engaging with the council to see is there anything else we can do to help you with the way you run your business, how you go about running your business, as I've said, maybe trying to get you to look at new customers, new products, new services, just to try and see if we can give you some support. Okay. Well, I think we've sort of come through towards the end there, folks. We're just over the hour or so. I'll bring it to a close. I'd just like to, first of all, big thank you to Tony and Paddy for coming along this morning. I think it just shows that when we use real business people that we get a far more positive result from the webinar. So thank you very much to Tony. Thank you to Paddy. Thank you to the team at the Middle East Antrim for putting together all the webinars, so to Stephen and Danielle. And we just really appreciate what they do for us every week. And for those of you out there, the session's coming to an end. You've got the slides, or the slides will be sent out to you. If you do have any other questions that came out of today's session, please, you'll see at the end of this presentation, there was some contact details for our teams, and please get in touch with them. And I'd have to say, what have you got to lose? Because you might as well try to help yourselves for the sake of an hour or two. You might just get something very, very useful. Okay, so thank you very much again to everybody. We'll bring it to a close there, please, Danielle. And again, thanks to Paddy.